Hey everybody, this is Chelsea, the dietitian, and we are going to go ahead and get started with support group for tonight. Today we're going to talk about ultra processed foods and how those impact our health. So ultra processed foods are things that we all get exposed to pretty frequently. We hear a lot about it, so I think it's important that we kind of dive into what they are, how they affect us, and then kind of what to do about it. So, ultra processed foods are highly processed foods that have a lot of added ingredients like sugar, salt, fat, artificial colors, different types of preservatives. And they can also contain, you know, artificial stabilizers and colorings and things like that as well. So, ultra processed foods go through multiple processes while they're being made. And that means things like extrusion, molding, milling, cooking, baking, things like that. And basically, they take a food item and they highly manipulate it before we end up consuming that item. General rule of thumb is that if a product has 5 or more ingredients that are not whole foods, it's likely an ultra processed food. Examples of ultra processed foods are things like sugar sweetened beverages, juice, soda, Kool-Aid, sweet tea, energy drinks, sweetened coffee drinks, things like that. Sweetened breakfast cereals, processed meats like deli meat, hot dogs, salami, bacon. Fast food falls into the ultra processed category. Packaged snacks like cookies and chips, and then frozen meals as well, like frozen pre-made meals. So, when it comes to these ultra processed foods and how they affect our health, studies definitely show a link between consumption of ultra processed foods and increased risk for overweight, obesity, heart disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and diabetes. There's actually one small study that I found where they took 20 people and put them in a research hospital for a month, and meals were provided for them. 2 weeks they got an ultra processed diet, and then for 2 weeks they got an unprocessed diet. The meals were matched though in terms of total fat, carbs, and protein. They also matched the fiber, sugar, and sodium intake across both the ultra processed and the unprocessed diet. So the question kind of being asked here was, if a calorie is just a calorie, then it shouldn't really matter the types of foods being eaten, right? But it turns out in the study that was not the case. So those who consumed the ultra processed diet on average ate 500 more calories per day than the unprocessed diet phase. They also found that during the time when they were eating the ultra processed diet, people ate more quickly, and everyone gained an average of about 2 pounds during that ultra processed phase of the study. However, they lost 2 pounds during the unprocessed phase of the study. So the conclusion really was, when it comes to food quality, reducing the amount of ultra processed foods that we consume can be an effective strategy to help you lose weight. Now, one of the major concerns regarding ultra processed foods is their kind of addictive like potential. So the added fat, the added sugar, the added salt is done by design by the food manufacturers to be as tasty as possible to keep us coming back for more. Promotes increased consumption. This is beneficial for their bottom line. If we love these foods and we're eating more of them faster, we're going to buy more of it, right? So studies also show that these ultra processed foods can have, it's not the same, I want to put that disclaimer, it's not the same as drug addiction, but it does light up a very similar kind of reward response in our brain, similar to drugs and alcohol when we consume them. So it keeps us coming back for more, and they do that by design. Lucky us. So when it comes to kind of the average intake and where we kind of see these ultra processed foods coming from, The average American diet is composed of about 57% ultra processed foods, only about 30% minimally processed foods, and then the other 12% is, toppings like cheese and cooking ingredients and things like that. So when we think about this and we think about maybe wanting to reduce our ultra processed food intake, we got to know where they come from. So the difference here with unprocessed or minimally processed foods are these are the foods that are kind of in their natural state and they have not really been altered in any way. They don't contain any additives like salt, sugar, fat, oils. These minimally processed foods have undergone some type of processing, like maybe they've been washed or packaged, but really have very few or no added ingredients. Examples would be like fresh produce, raw uncooked meats, whole grains like quinoa, brown rice, rolled oats, nuts and seeds, cold pressed plant oils, and beans are all either unprocessed or minimally processed depending on kind of how they're packaged. Processed foods means that the food has changed from its natural state. In some cases, though, we do have to process a food to make it safe to eat. For example, pasteurizing milk or cooking raw meat before we eat it. Those are processes that need to happen for safety. So things like whole grain bread that don't have added sugar, plain yogurt, cheese, pasteurized milk, canned foods like tuna, corn, peas, pears, beans that have minimal additives. Those are all processed foods or minimally processed foods where we've done something to change them, but we haven't really added a lot to change the nature of the product itself. So those unprocessed foods, as an example, would be like fresh fruit, fresh fish or meat, raw unsalted nuts, wheat, water are unprocessed items. Processed foods would be something like a fruit cup packaged in juice, canned fish, roasted and salted nuts, flour, seltzer water. Those are examples of a processed food. But then we have ultra processed foods, things like fruit drinks, frozen fish sticks, nut butter with added oil and sugar, cookies, soda. You get the drift, right? So we have natural, we have minimally processed, and we have ultra processed foods. A lot of times, cutting back on ultra processed foods can require a lot more time shopping, meal prepping, cooking compared to the ultra processed versions, and that can be tough to do. But that being said, there are some easy ways where you can reduce your intake of ultra processed foods that you may find are a little bit easier to manage, and it can actually help you better control your portion size and be more supportive of your goals. So a few things to keep in mind. Drinking more water is always helpful, right? And we know hydration is super important here. Bottled and canned drinks are more expensive because of the added steps for processing it, shipping it, advertising it. Every time we buy a food product, we're paying for their advertising, right? Sugar sweetened beverages also don't help us feel full compared to actually eating our calories. So it can lead to overall consuming more than we really need, especially compared to if we're only drinking water or a calorie-free beverage option. Another thing to think about is reducing the amount of processed meats that you consume. Now, this can be a tough one. Things like cold cuts, bacon, cured meats, sausage, hot dogs, salami. I know in some ways deli meat is a really easy go-to protein source, but can we not necessarily eliminate but reduce our intake of some of these items? So for example, could you grill a whole package of chicken to use for sandwiches and wraps versus deli meat every day, or get a pre-cooked rotisserie chicken that you can kind of carve the meat off of instead? Having veggies and fruits and things ready to eat on hand is always helpful too. Fruits like apples, bananas, oranges, berries really require very little prep before we eat them. Frozen fruits and veggies can also help kind of reduce waste if you're living alone or live with family members who don't eat a lot of those foods. Um, since fresh produce has to be eaten before it goes bad, the frozen is definitely going to last longer. It's always good to have on hand. And, if kind of prepping your fruits and veggies is a barrier to eating them, consider getting them pre-cut or look for things like Persian cucumbers or the mini sweet peppers or baby carrots that really don't require a lot of prep before you have to eat them. So, a few kind of steps to remember. You want to first build your awareness. So, you want to read the ingredients list, know what you're getting before you buy it. Think about how often you see 5+ ingredients on a label. How often are you finding or buying a food product that you would never, really find in your kitchen alone, right? So that's kind of a good rule of thumb to follow. Also, really important is to start slow. The goal is not to overly cleanse your food choices. It's okay to rely on processed food sometimes if that's what makes life easier for you. Nutritious eating can look any way we need it to, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. So start slow. Maybe you pick one food item or one food group to eat a little less processed over time. Keep in mind, given our current culture and environment, it's definitely not always easy to completely avoid those processed foods. And you really have to take the changes that you make into consideration as far as, is it sustainable and realistic in the long term for you? Can you bake your own bread every day for the rest of your life? I know I couldn't. So if that's not a realistic option, find a happy medium that might be more realistic for you and your family. And then the third thing is to plan ahead. Make those minimally processed foods more easily accessible by prepping them in advance. For example, you get home from the grocery store and you go ahead and wash and chop things you need for the next couple of days, or prep things in large batches so you don't have to do it every single day. And another kind of plan ahead tip is to pack your own snacks. If you're going to be out and about for a while or somewhere where there's only a vending machine, can you throw a individual bag of baby carrots and a cheese stick in your bag to have in a couple of hours if you get hungry, instead of going to get, the Doritos or whatever out of the vending machine? So, a few kind of swap ideas to consider here would be, instead of like sugar sweetened cereal, you could find a low added sugar option, like choosing regular Cheerios or plain rice or corn Chex, for example. Or to increase the nutritional value, instead of sugary cereal, could you do, rolled oats with fresh or frozen fruit? I personally like frozen because then the juices of the fruit kind of combine with the oats and then it sweetens it without me having to add a sweetener or honey or something else. So that's a great thing. You could stir in a little spoonful of yogurt to add some protein to that mixture as well. Instead of bagged microwave popcorn, can you air pop your own? The way I like to do this is I just buy brown lunch bags, like we packed our lunch in back in the day. Get a bag of corn kernels from like the popcorn aisle at the grocery store. Put a quarter cup or so of those kernels in that brown bag, fold the top over, pop it in the microwave. Listen for the pop. If you don't hear a pop for more than about 5 seconds in between, it's time to pull it out. Drizzle a little bit of olive oil, some salt and pepper, season it up, or get some popcorn seasoning and make your own instead without all of the added stuff. And it tastes just as yummy. Instead of a store-bought trail mix that maybe has a lot of sugar, added sugar fruit or something like that in there, can you make your own with, a handful of nuts, maybe a few broken up pretzels for some saltiness, and a few dark chocolate chips? Make your own concoction instead. Salad dressing is another one. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for some real ranch, okay? But can you maybe more often than not do an oil and vinegar mixture with some lemon and some dried herbs on that salad and let the veggies do the work as far as flavor? And instead of, box mashed potatoes, can you do a baked potato and then just smash it up with a little bit of, just little dollop of butter, a little dab of butter, and some salt to get that flavor rather than the box pre-flavored options. I also wanted to share a few prep tips that can be really helpful. So, for example, washing and kind of separating your fruits and veggies into containers as soon as you get home from the grocery store. You have to unpackage it anyway to put it away, so you might as well take an extra 10 minutes, wash it, get it ready to use, and save you the prep time later. Um, Another thing that can be really helpful is kind of batch prepping your veggies. So if you've got a busy week ahead and you're already making dinner and chopping things, can you go ahead and chop up your veggies, throw them on a baking sheet and put them in the oven, roast them while you're making dinner for tonight, and now you've got veggies for the rest of the week that you can warm up and heat as a side, add to a salad, things like that. And then another thing that can be really helpful is batch cook the things that take longer. So for example, if you're going to have, some type of bowl style meal, can you go ahead and cook the rice or cook the quinoa, put it in the fridge, have it ready to go so you're not spending that 20 or 30 minutes multiple times a week? Can you, throw a whole bunch of chicken in a crock pot and use it different ways, or use that rotisserie chicken, or grill some, you know, lean beef burgers and chicken at the same time and use it in different ways through the week. So use those, use the time that you do have to kind of prep ahead and make life easier for you when it does get busy. We can all find an excuse and say we don't have time, right? And believe me, I know we do not all have the same 24 hours in a day, but if it's important to us, we have to find some time to, at least prep a little bit for ourselves to make the rest of the week and the busy times easier. So, hopefully, this is helpful. A few tips and tricks to help reduce some of those ultra processed foods. Um, I would like to say, though, at the end, fed is best no matter what. If budget constraints are a challenge, or time is a challenge, or travel is a challenge, do your best. Can you unprocess one of your options at a meal, or one of your meals per day, or a couple meals a week? Again, start slow, find what's doable for you. And of course, whenever you have questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Maggie, your dietitian, whoever you're working with, and we're happy to help you walk through ideas and ways that you can incorporate this for yourself. So let us know your thoughts if you all have questions. And as a reminder, the video will stay here for about 30 days, I believe, and then otherwise you can find it in the YouTube channel to rewatch later. So hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.